On February the 22nd, 1994, Emily came into the world. They gave it to me to hold, and I held her in my arm, and her head was in my palm, and her feet were in the kind of crook of my elbow. Emily opened her eyes slowly, and we just sat there staring at each other. I just felt this love that I'd never felt for anything before.
Emily Longley was found dead in bed. The house where Emily Longley's body was found is listed to the name Turner.
Dorset police say they're looking at several lines of inquiry. A 19-year-old man had been arrested and released on bail.
Very early on, we started to get a picture. This is quite a volatile relationship.
It's just not on, mate. It's just like, oh yeah, do you love me? We'll just show it.
He wanted to know where she was all the time, what she wore, who she was going out with, and where she was going to be.
He just wanted to control her.
Do you have anything at all to say?
Turner's mum and dad were going to do everything they could to support their son.
I started to appreciate that Mrs. Turner was not being truthful.
We had no information. There were no obvious internal or external injuries to Emily Longley.
There didn't seem to be an obvious reason why she died.
What we needed was a cause of death. We had to prove or disprove my theory that Emily had died at the hands of her boyfriend.
I think there was just more vital evidence that was a confession.
That was a startling moment within the investigation.
He was exposed for what he is.
Murder was the last thing on my mind.
Not just grabbed her as hard as I could.
I didn't for 1 second think she'd be murdered.
What's happened there? No reason for the call.
My son's friend is staying with us. This morning, I tried to wake both of them up, but the girl didn't wake up. We tried to wake her up. I don't know what it is.
Right, now, is she breathing?
No, I don't think she is.
I need you to pull back the duvet for me and just look to see if you can see any signs of breathing.
I tried to hold the pulse.
No, I need you to put your face next to her mouth. Can you feel any breath? Can you see her chest going up and down?
No.
Anything round her neck?
Anything around her neck? Oh, that necklace. No, she's got a necklace very tight.
Very tight round her neck?
Yeah.
How tight?
Very, very tight. The ambulance is here.
Right, I need you to undo that necklace, and somebody needs to open the door. Your son, can you distract your son? I need you to open the front door and get that necklace from around her neck off.
Okay.
Now, do it now.
On the morning of Monday, the 7th of May, we were informed that a 17-year-old had been found dead in her boyfriend's bed at an address in Bournemouth. Her boyfriend, Elliot Turner, aged 19 years, was also present, and Elliot's mother had contacted the emergency services. I arrived at the Turners' house at 12 noon on Monday the 7th. By the time I had arrived at the house, the occupants had been taken out. The paramedics had left, and I entered this 4-bedroom bungalow. The crime scene itself was a small bedroom. The scene in the bedroom was certainly not like a typical murder scene. The place was immaculate, and there was no sign of disturbance in the room. In the middle of the bedroom was a double bed, and on the double bed lay Emily Longley. dressed in denim shorts and a denim top. There was no trauma to her body. I did notice there was a slight mark on Emily's neck, consistent with a necklace being tight, but apart from that, she was presented immaculately. There was no sign of a fight or violence. Elliot had a couple of nicks on his arm and a slight bruise on his side. There was no obvious pieces of evidence. At the scene, Elliot told a uniform officer that he and Emily had been out the night before, that they'd been intoxicated, that they'd had an argument, a physical argument, and at one stage he had made contact with her neck.
He said he didn't mean to hurt her. I never meant to harm her, I just defended myself. He said she was kicking and screaming and he just pushed her on the neck to get her off.
Elliot had said that Emily was okay after this, and in fact he went and got her some water, and that they then went to bed together, and it wasn't until the morning that he discovered that she was deceased. A post-mortem examination was scheduled for 4 o'clock that afternoon. In this case, it was looking at Emily's neck and any injuries that was apparent on her body.
Mr. Turner was in the best position to tell us how Emily had passed away. He was the one with all the information. He was the one with all the knowledge. I can recall when we placed him in his cell. It was a bit alien to him and frightening, should we say, because I don't think he thought he was going into a cell. He thought he was just there to help with our inquiry. But once he was in that cell and he realised that only the custody staff or myself could let him out, became a little bit on top for him, should we say.
Elliot is admitted into custody at 11:29, and we have got 24 hours to either charge him or release him.
Emily was just a kind of game-on little girl. I just kind of strapped myself in and went along for the ride.
Daddy. Emily, boo. Boo.
At about the age of 18 months, she was diagnosed with a form of osteoporosis.
She was always kind of in and out of hospital. She had eczema and asthma and food intolerances and heaps of allergies that really impacted her. She wanted to grab life by the reins, and those things got in the way of her being able to do that. I mean, she did them anyway, but then she would suffer the consequences later on.
We moved to New Zealand, it was 2003.
I had just turned 8 and Emily was 9.
It was really because of Emily that we moved over here. One specialist said the best thing you can do for her probably is move out of London and go to a kind of greener, more outdoor environment. Moving about as far away as you can get from England before you turn around and start coming back was kind of daunting.
I really missed my family, my grandparents and my extended family. I did like our life in New Zealand, but I just was really homesick as well.
When Emily was about 14, Caroline and I separated. That had a big effect on Emily.
She didn't take it very well at all. She definitely had a rebellious streak.
I would be lying in bed and I'd hear her bedroom window open up. So I'd get out of bed and I'd see her running off down the road into a parked car because she was going off into town, clubbing at 15, which of course I was horrified by. But it was pretty hard to stop her unless I put bars on the windows and chained her up.
She just wanted to do everything, and she was the kind of kid that was like, well, why can't I? Why can't I do this?
Emily left first because it was the summer holidays here. I flew over on Christmas Eve, and she found out about this college called Brockenhurst College. So I arrived, and Emily said to me, "I've got an interview at Brockenhurst College." And I'm like, what? So we went along, and then 20 minutes later, they came out, and Emily was beaming, and this lady said, "Oh, we'd love to have Emily here." And I thought, shit. She was absolutely determined that she wanted to take this place up. Obviously, it was a long way away, but she was going to live with my parents in Bournemouth, a very familiar environment. It was a hard decision to make. If I'd said no, I probably would have woken up one night to her window opening and her running off to a car that would have taken her to the airport, and she just would have gone anyway.
I remember being like heartbroken because all I wanted to do at that point was go back to the UK and be with my family. Yeah, I was feeling really, I think, angry and resentful that she left and I stayed.
She got a job at Topshop, which she really enjoyed. She was doing business at Brockenhurst. She was really blossoming. She was enjoying it. The first time we heard the name of Elliot Turner, I think, was around her birthday in February. My mother said this guy was kind of on the scene, and he seemed to be quite charming, quite responsible. I kind of asked Emily about him, and she wasn't too forthcoming. He was just a guy she was seeing. And then my mother asked me if I was okay if they went away for the weekend together. And I spoke to Emily, and they were going to the Isle of Man. And so I said, fine. She came back to New Zealand at Easter, April 2011. Oh my God, the transformation was incredible. She had left a gawky teenager and come back a young woman. She was happy, she was confident.
Emily had grown up in some ways and, you know, kind of emotionally matured. She was still like fiery and had like this drive for life. So she was still going out and seeing her friends and still having fun. But then we could, you know, come home and have conversations and hang out, and it was nice.
We just went back to how it was. I remember walking on the beach with Emily and Hannah, and they were a bit behind me, and I stopped to look round and let them catch up, and I thought, everything's fine now. We're all happy, we've all found our place. I kind of thought she'll tell us about her new boyfriend, but we kind of talked about him a bit. I think she told me she was going to go back and end it with him. She didn't really say why.
Her and I were in a much better place. I decided to go to the airport with my mum and actually see her off this time. My mum and I were planning on going in July for my 16th birthday. When we were at the airport, she had one of her fur coats and I was wearing it for her, and she said, "Oh, you can keep it and you can look after it for me, and then when you come back in July, you can bring it and you can give it back to me."
I was really sad to see her go, but I was also really happy that she was going back to a life that she seemed to be really enjoying. I was really proud of her. She went back, and I was driving back, and she texted me a text. She said, "It was great to see you. I love you," which was the sorry. Which was the last communication we had on that trip.
I kind of been asleep for very long, and I woke up and I just remember thinking, like, what is that noise? And so I came out of my room and went into the lounge, and it was my mum screaming. Just this most like gut-wrenching horror scream I'd ever heard in my life. The phone was next to her, and I just remember picking up the phone. The first person I called was my dad.
I woke up and checked my phone, and there were a load of missed calls from my mother and from Caroline's number. I listened to my answer machine, and I could just hear Caroline wailing in the background and Hannah asking me to call. So I called my mother, and my father answered, and I don't really remember too much of this conversation, but he put a policeman on, and the policeman said, we've got a body in the morgue and we think it's your daughter. I just didn't believe that this girl who'd just been here a week before and was so full of life, I just didn't believe that she could be dead.
Mystery surrounds the death of a 17-year-old New Zealander found dead in Britain.
Our New Zealand newsroom was made aware of Emily Longley's death soon after it happened via police media releases.
When the news broke, there was a lot of speculation, quite a febrile environment of people trying to work out what had happened here and get to the bottom of it.
There was a sense that this was just a tragedy. I was concerned for Turner in the first instance. You know, I thought, well, if my son woke up in the morning and his girlfriend was dead, that would be a hugely traumatic experience for the whole family.
We were waiting to find out what happened. They said a post-mortem is happening and we are going to check for things like heart attack or cancer.
I didn't know what could cause a healthy 17-year-old girl to die. There is sudden death syndrome, which can strike in your teens. She could have taken something. She could have mixed a drink with something.
Police were saying at that point they were looking at the toxicology report as an indication to cause of death.
Emily was a fit and healthy young lady at the start of her life. We know that Emily was socialising on Friday. Has anyone got any information on anything Emily may have taken on Friday night? The crime scene is first looked at by the crime scene investigators to retrieve any fibres or DNA. And then items of interest, such as phones, computers, bed linen, are also retrieved. As well as looking at the crime scene, forensics, pathology, we wanted to get a picture of the relationship between Emily and Elliot. We looked at identifying witnesses and getting first accounts. Very early on in the investigation, I realised that Elliot Turner had a dark side to him.
I left the following morning and made the drive to the airport, and we stopped for petrol, and I went to pay, and there was a newspaper stand, and the front page was just a picture of Emily. I almost threw up on the forecourt. It was like someone had whacked me in the stomach with a baseball bat just seeing this.
This was very much a story that New Zealanders wanted to hear.
We have a rite of passage that we call an OE, an overseas experience for young people in New Zealand to go off travelling.
Almost any parent who had a child or anyone who had a friend who'd done that know what it's like to be on your own, far from home, and a little bit vulnerable.
I remember being at the airport and I was just in a daze. When someone dies, you're absolutely devastated, but no one else knows about it. And so I was thinking, why are all these people going about their business like nothing's happened? Do they not understand what's happened? And I was thinking they should have shut the airport and cancelled the flights. You know, why is no one else sad that my daughter's dead?
I remember having a moment on the plane of bursting into tears, of being like, I don't want this flight to end. I don't want to land in England, because in the plane we're in a bit of a bubble. Like, we could almost have a sense of denial about it, I suppose.
I just remember thinking, this isn't true. I'm going to get to England and this won't be true.
We started reaching out to friends of both Emily and Elliot, and very early on we got a picture of quite a toxic relationship between them. During their 4-month relationship, Emily had decided to return to New Zealand to see her parents. Through the accounts of witnesses, we discovered that Elliot had seen footage from Facebook of her enjoying herself with friends, female and male friends, and he was extremely jealous.
He had created this reality for himself that just clearly wasn't true.
We discover a voicemail from Elliot Turner to an associate.
It's just not on, mate. It's just like, oh yeah, do you love me? Well, fucking show it. Show it what you do. I'll fucking show it. Just being an arsehole, it's just so disrespectful.
We started to get a picture of the type of character that Elliot Turner was. Witnesses described Elliot as a flash, cash-rich kid who modelled himself on being a gangster. He had received a warning for harassment when he was 16.
Mr. Turner seen himself as a little bit of a leader to his group of friends.
They would go around thinking that they owned the bars. Emily was introduced to Elliot in January. The relationship she had with Elliot was clearly at times a loving relationship. During that time, what became clear is that Elliot would threaten her, would ridicule her.
This was a way to isolate and belittle and all the things that those behaviours are meant to do.
He would turn up unannounced and uninvited when Emily went out with friends. He would find out where Emily was drinking that night, and he would sit there and wait for her.
Emily would say, I'm out with my friends. He'd then go and sit in the car park crying. So Emily would then, of course, feel sorry for him and go out there, and she'd eventually end up leaving with him. Turner exploited this. Emily wouldn't have liked to see anyone upset.
He would try and control her. He wanted to know where she was all the time, who she was going out with, and where she was going to be, and even down to details of what she wore when she was going out with her friends. His bullying behaviour escalated throughout his relationship with Emily.
The picture that I drew of the relationship was that it was actually very violent. Like, there were a number of instances where things had gotten violent between the two of them, and it was him being the perpetrator of that, him dominating over her.
He viewed Emily as kind of his possession. He was incredibly jealous.
Clearly, these are controlling and coercive traits. It became clear at the very start of this investigation that prior to her death, multiple threats had been made. One of the exhibits seized from Elliot's bedroom when he was arrested on the 7th of May was a letter written by Emily to Elliot following their stay at a hotel in the Isle of Man. The content of this letter identified Emily's concerns about the history of threats made by Elliot towards Emily and concerns about his violent behaviour.
In that letter, she had told Mr. Turner that she loved him, but then she also told him to stop saying that you're going to kill me.
For her to ask him to stop being so aggressive, and that being not aggressive was much hotter, it was clear that this was a pattern of behaviour that he was clearly doing to her.
From 30th of April, we discover another voicemail from Elliot Turner where he clearly outlines the fact that he is going to cause serious harm to Emily.
Fuck her. You know what? Out of every single bird, I'm going to fucking mess this one up. I'm going to fuck her off soon. Absolutely fuck her off soon.
We received CCTV from the night of the 30th of Emily entering a bar and making contact with Elliot, and he clearly is dismissive of her, doesn't want to speak to her.
That then escalated into actually assaulting her in front of friends and in public.
And Turner comes up and grabs her head and smashes it into the table.
We've heard accounts from witnesses and Emily herself regarding the violence, but this was the first footage of actual violence from Elliot towards Emily.
Surely this was a red flag to someone. It was incredibly frustrating to hear all this stuff and know that no one had done anything.
The phone data that we captured clearly showed the intention by Elliot to cause Emily harm, the intimidation, the insults. This is indicative of someone who is intending to cause their victim physical harm. And the challenge was to show that, to prove or disprove that Elliot Turner had murdered Emily.
Within the investigation from witnesses, it became apparent that the relationship was a volatile relationship.
Around 7 days before Emily died, Emily decided to break up the relationship.
She was trying to distance herself from Mr. Turner.
The effect of that is an escalation of jealousy and violence towards Emily.
He wanted to continue to have her and control her. What probably took it to that next level was getting broken up with and realizing, oh, I can't always have her, but I need her under my control.
He just couldn't take that. That was becoming quite clear. I think he said, if I can't have her, no one can.
On the 5th of May, Elliot became aware that Emily was out with another male, and he had learnt that they were drinking in a nearby bar. He armed himself with a hammer. His intention was to go over and assault her at the bar. CCTV shows Elliot entering a club with what appears to be a lump hammer down the front of his trousers. Fortunately, the friends notified Emily, who was not at the bar. She was home doing her homework. He didn't make contact with Emily, but he still went on to tell all of Emily's friends that he, in fact, had killed Emily. And later on that evening, he told the friends that it was just a joke.
We got this picture built up of this incredibly manipulative man. I think he was kind of testing the boundaries to see whether he could get away with it or not.
We've had threats regarding a lump hammer. We've had witnesses come forward and friends of Emily saying that he has threatened violence. Well, now we were seeing footage of Elliot going to a club and going into the club with a lump hammer. So it's a clear escalation of violence. On the evening of the 6th of May, Emily decides to go out with friends. CCTV shows she arrives at a bar just after 9 p.m. And shortly after her arrival, Elliot, who clearly has been following her, also arrives. Both are seen together. We know from text messages between Elliot and his mother that Emily had disrespected him and had poured drink over him, and that he intended to harm her. Following the altercation, Emily leaves with a friend without Elliot and goes round another friend's house. He turns up at the friend's house. and eventually persuades Emily to go with him. Witnesses then report seeing Emily and Elliot arguing outside of his home address.
We believed that escalated into him actually killing her in the early hours of the 7th.
The investigation progresses into the next few hours. I started to appreciate that Mrs. Turner was not being truthful with her account or with her description of the relationship between Emily and Elliot. Mrs. Turner gave her opinion on the relationship and said the relationship between Elliot and Emily was loving, that she had no issues, she'd not seen any squabbles or concerns. The report from the paramedics stated that Mrs. Turner was very distressed and had given an account of seeing Emily and Elliot in the kitchen having a drink of water at 5 in the morning. When they were later interviewed separately, Mrs. Turner changed this account to only seeing Elliot. And also, phone data highlighted Mrs. Turner had made contact with her husband and waited for him to come home before she reported the death of Emily. The 999 suggested that Emily had only recently been found not breathing by Mrs. Turner. Present at the time was Mr. Turner, and he can be heard on the 999.
If you look at her face, what colour are her lips? Her lips is what colour is her lips?
Purple.
The early accounts given by Mr. Turner will say that he received a phone call from Mrs. Turner when he was working in Bournemouth, which meant he would have had to have travelled several miles to his home address before the phone call was then made to the emergency services, suggesting that there potentially was a delay of between 1 and 2 hours from the time that she knew that Emily was deceased. Mr. and Mrs. Turner were not telling us the truth. They were holding back on information around the death of Emily.
I got off the plane and I went straight to the morgue where Emily was. I still didn't believe that it was Emily. I thought I'm going to get there and it won't be her, it'll be someone else. And the lights slowly came up and it just seemed to take forever. And I remember thinking, I'm going to look at the bed and it won't be Emily, it'll be someone else, and I'll say, that's not her. And the light came up and sure enough, it was Emily lying on the bed. I touched her face to wake her up and it was cold, like ice cold. It still felt smooth, like she had skin like alabaster. The walls of my world just came tumbling down.
By Saturday afternoon, we have established a motive. We have got evidence from text messages and from accounts by witnesses. We had discrepancies in the timeline. We are now awaiting the results of the post-mortem examination that's taking place on Saturday evening. We fully expected to hear that Elliot Turner had caused the death of Emily through injury to her neck. The results of the post-mortem came back and the results were unascertained. The pathologist could not give a verdict on the cause of death. There was insufficient evidence to suggest that Emily had been asphyxiated or suffocated. The pathologist was saying that she had not died from strangulation. Going one step further, he also suggested that whilst it was rare, death in young people does happen through natural causes.
We had no information. The toxicology report had come back clean. There were no obvious internal or external injuries to Emily Longley. There was one minor bruise to Elliot Turner, who was to say at that point was even related. So it was very difficult to say what this story was even about.
It wasn't alcohol related. She hadn't taken any drugs. There didn't seem to be an obvious reason why she died.
What we had to continue with is to try and prove or disprove that Elliot Turner had murdered Emily. Investigators had noticed an exhibit that had been photographed on the scene was now missing, and this was a jacket. It became apparent that the parents had been allowed to visit the scene that Sunday morning. Mr. Turner stated he wanted to recover some medicine, and they were allowed into the crime scene, and once they'd left the crime scene, the exhibit had disappeared. They were immediately spoken to about it and denied removing the item, and then decided to disengage from contact with the police. The disappearance of the jacket further enhanced my suspicion that Mr. and Mrs. Turner were not telling us the truth.
The first interview took place on the 8th of May in the morning. We normally try to establish some kind of rapport, open communication, talk about common themes that we may have interests in, but there was nothing with Elliot, there was nothing there. He would laugh at some of our questions that we put to him. He would snigger and he would smirk. Mr. Turner showed no remorse or sympathy or concern for Emily or for Emily's family, and he replied no comment to all questions. We believed that he had killed Emily, but at that time there was insufficient evidence to charge him with any offence, and he was placed on police bail.
Murder investigations are never straightforward. We had exhausted other means to recover information around this case. Elliot had decided to not reply to any of our questions on interview, and the parents had now disengaged and were not speaking to the police.
It was frustrating not to have a conclusive post-mortem result, but Neil Devoto was very upfront with me. He said, I can't tell you everything. You've just got to trust us. They believed that Elliot Turner had killed her and that they were committed to proving that.
I make a request to Specialist Unit that I want to hear the content of conversation in a house between Elliot and his parents. What we needed was a cause of death.
Covert monitoring, as you can imagine, the bugging of somebody's house is at the very extreme end of that sort of activity. Elliot Turner was suspected of probably the most serious offence on the statute, murder, and therefore it was decided that that tactic may be appropriate to establish his involvement or otherwise. We were listening out for, certainly obviously, admissions, key discussions around the circumstances of the case, whether that be key witnesses, key evidence, key movements, key activities. So on the evening of the 18th of May, we heard Mr. Turner, Elliot's father, talking about the destruction of vital evidence in relation to the case.
Every second of my day is burning. But I know something that they don't know. burning me, eating me up. Now I shouldn't have destroyed that.
Mr. Turner clearly referred to the letter being a confession, outlining Elliot Turner's guilt.
What did they destroy vital evidence? We've perverted the course of justice. That was a confession.
That was a startling moment within the investigation. Clearly a significant piece of evidence. Without that, we would not have been made aware of his parents' complicitness in the offence.
It also goes on to explain that this letter was disposed of. It's quite possible that that confession letter had been hidden in the jacket, which was the item removed by Mrs. Turner when she returned to the crime scene and was given access.
That letter I destroyed with bleach. Saying that he's killed him, he didn't mean to do it.
No, he didn't say that. No, sorry. He didn't say that.
Stop denying it.
No, I am denying because it didn't.
What did he say?
It's just that it's out of defense. He doesn't know what it is.
You fucking strong.
For the dad to refer to it as a strangulation, clearly this is of huge significance to the major crime team. So in the early hours of 21st of May, there was a conversation between Elliot Turner and his parents. He was talking about his mistreatment of Emily.
I just grabbed her and fucking grabbed her as hard as I could in my work fucking out. Grabbed her like that.
It didn't clearly prove that he had murdered her, but it gave an indication of his character and his behaviour towards her.
That girl is, by me meeting that girl has ruined my life.
Yes,
She has ruined my life.
She did ruin your life.
In the early hours of the 1st of June, it's quite apparent that Elliot Turner has been conducting some research on a computer.
Came back in, so she's browsing on a computer, typed in death by strangulation, death by suffocation, manslaughter to trial, how to get off innocent, and I also typed in fucking Google, how to get away with serious crimes.
Why would you research those terms on a computer? A person researching the information clearly has got something to worry about. Whilst it isn't a clear admission of guilt, it is a significant contributory evidence to Elliot Turner's state of mind.
You can hear firsthand from Elliot and from his parents about the criminal activity that they've been involved in, which had resulted in the death of Emily.
There's a conversation between Elliot and his mother. It is clear Elliot is discussing with her the reason that there was a delay in calling 999, an ambulance.
You need to say that that phone call wasn't about Emily. That phone call was about Elliot for work. He's being a lazy bastard. I was complaining to his dad. I was annoyed at him. Yeah, Mum, but focus the conversation because it looks fucking. You look so guilty. You look so guilty by ringing the father. But Mum, please, from a policeman's point of view, it's so obvious.
When it came to speaking about Emily, there was never any tears or breakdown or emotions when the subject of Emily and her death was discussed.
The truth will come out, Elliot.
What truth? Doctor said I was going to kill her. Sent text messages said I was going to kill her. Went to a club with a weapon. That is the truth. That's going to come out. Fuck me when I get a call. I'm going to be fucked.
The results that we got back from the covert product were far beyond what we expected.
Not only did it point to Elliot's responsibility for Emily's death, but it also painted a picture of the dynamics within the household, the lengths that his parents would go to try and exonerate him to try and ensure that he was never found guilty of the crime.
What the covert product did was fill all the gaps. And we had an understanding of how Emily had died. On the 19th of July 2011, Mr. and Mrs. Turner were arrested for perverting the course of justice. Elliot Turner was arrested for the murder of Emily Longley and perverting the course of justice.
We interviewed Elliot a number of times over the 2 subsequent days, detailing all the evidence that we have. The knowledge of a letter that was written by Elliot and concealed and destroyed by his parents. And we've actually played some discs of the actual audio recordings. We hoped that once he realised we had a covert product, and once he realised the details of the covert product, he might want to speak to us. At times, you could tell he wanted to speak or wanted to give a reply or a reaction, but his solicitor reminded him of his advice for Mr. Turner to make no comment. There was deemed to be sufficient evidence to charge Mr. Turner, and late that day, he was charged with the murder of Emily.
This was a shocking case of domestic violence. It didn't matter that they were young and the relationship was quite short. I began to build the case with the police and start the preparations ultimately for the trial. We had a murder that took place with only 2 people in that room, and there was obviously no CCTV within that room. We had to put together what we knew in terms of the build-up, what we could prove as far as the relationship was concerned. There was the text messages, the CCTV, the build-up that you could see in terms of the jealousy. This was a case where there probably wasn't one major piece of evidence. It was putting together every single strand of it. And when you put it together, it presented a compelling picture.
The lack of an obvious cause of death was kind of the one big sticking point with the case. The rest of it was kind of stacking up, but they didn't know for sure how Emily had died.
We went to see the renowned physician, Jason Payne James, and put to him the injuries to Emily and the injuries to Elliot. Were they consistent with Elliot causing the death of Emily?
The police asked me to look at the case and then give a further opinion based on the new evidence that hadn't been initially available to the forensic pathologist or the investigators at an earlier stage. She had some minor bruises, petechiae, inside her upper eyelids and inside her upper lip. There are no marks, there are no bruises. Elliot had a bruise to his arm and he had scratch to the left arm. We can't date the bruise to the arm, the scratch to the arm, but it suggested that he'd been involved in some form of altercation at some stage. So one of the other findings that we have to consider is if somebody is grabbed around the neck, is there a possibility they can be grabbed, compressed around the neck without responding, without fighting? So if somebody's taken alcohol or somebody is strong enough to overpower them, then there may not be any signs of external injury. Is that consistent with somebody having neck compression leading to their death? And the answer is very simply, yes, it is.
It was coming into winter. Every day seemed dark and miserable. And to be honest, I didn't really know what to do.
Everyone kept saying to me, like, you just need to find a new normal. And I was like, what's just happened to me isn't normal.
We got a trial date, which was something we could psych ourselves up for.
Life awaiting trial is just horrific. It was more than just grief, it was depression, it was horrible.
We wanted to be at the trial to support Emily, really. We wanted to be there and look the Turners in the eye every day and know that Emily was still loved and missed. Day one of the trial, I was really nervous. I didn't want Turner to get off. I wanted everyone to know the truth about what happened.
You feel pressure in every case. This was heightened because of the media attention, not just in this country, but also in New Zealand.
The boyfriend of a New Zealand teenager found dead in the UK will appear in court in several hours, charged with her murder.
From day one, when I turned up to Winchester Court, I thought this is going to be a big trial. I don't know that I understood quite how important and how much appetite there would be for coverage of it until we got underway.
I heard the prosecution outline the case against him, which included the progressively more violent behaviour towards Emily. I was so stunned with what I'd heard that he had done to my daughter. I just couldn't believe it. The first time I saw him properly was when he was in the witness box being cross-examined. And I thought he was an arrogant prick, really.
Elliot Turner to me almost seemed like he was expecting this would be over soon, and it was a bit of a bore. It was wasting his time.
There'd be a few moments where he'd like look up and you'd kind of catch his eye and he'd kind of try and stare you out, and I would stare right back. I hope you can see that this is a family and how much hurt is going through all of these people.
We set out that this was domestic violence, that there was a build-up. I think that was really important to understand, that the anger and the jealousy in Elliot Turner was building and building. We wanted to call the witnesses who could give details as to what was happening in the months, weeks, days before the murder.
They were terrified and they were so nervous, but they had fire in them, like they were gonna fight for her. Like none of them backed down, none of them were on his side.
There were a number of young witnesses being called by the prosecution. A friend gave evidence that he and Elliot Turner, the day before the murder, actually practiced a chokehold.
Prior to the trial, an associate of Elliot approached police to say that on the 6th of May, Elliot was in a rage and he was looking at ways in which he could kill Emily. And they had gone for a walk into a wooded area near Turner's home address.
And they had discussed how he was going to do it, whether he was going to set fire to her or I think he was going to drown her. And they practiced this chokehold.
Elliot proceeded to practice the manoeuvre on the associate, placing the arm around the neck. At one point, the associate said that he feared for his life because Elliot wouldn't let go and he nearly passed out.
And I just thought, surely at this point, someone is putting together that Emily's actually in danger. She's in serious danger by now. This has gone beyond the realms of normality.
This was premeditated, like he practiced what he was gonna do on one of his friends. This was an opportunity where someone could have said, this isn't okay and this is actually going too far.
If there had ever been any doubts that Elliot Turner might be the kind of person that was capable of putting someone in a stranglehold, we now knew that he definitely was the kind of person because he was doing it with his friends.
It could be suggested that's just bravado, but ultimately this was demonstrating how you could kill the day before you actually do kill, and I think that was really important evidence.
Elliot Turner said that actually he was acting in self-defense against an attack that Emily Longley was carrying out against him.
He didn't show remorse at all. Every opportunity he got, he would try and spin it so that he wasn't in the wrong.
He wasn't in the slightest bit upset that his girlfriend was dead. It was so obvious that it prompted the lawyer to say, "You don't seem very sad that Emily's dead." And he said, "Well, it was a year ago." There was a kind of gasp from the public gallery. You know, no one could believe that he'd said that.
There was a fair bit riding on the evidence of Dr. Jason Payne James because we still didn't know definitely what was the cause of death. We started hearing about the stranglehold, but it was the relation between that and the lack of injuries, both to Elliot Turner and Emily Longley.
If I put pressure on somebody's neck to a certain degree, we know that within 9-10 seconds, somebody will be rendered unconscious, so they can't struggle. And then prolonged pressure, which won't leave any visible marks, will result in death.
What the prosecution were saying through Jason Payne James' evidence was that a stranglehold is a very strange technique to hold someone in if you're acting in self-defense.
This really helped in dismantling self-defense. It really assisted in terms of the credibility of the suggestion that there was just a push to the neck. I mean, it clearly wasn't that. This wasn't self-defense.
There was one damning bit of evidence on Turner's shirt. There was traces of Emily's makeup.
Well, at the crook of Elliot's shirt, there was evidence of Emily's saliva and DNA to the forearm. Certainly is suggestive that Elliot's forearm was around her mouth and possibly her neck.
It was kind of like a light went on with the jury. That was the missing piece.
The most crucial evidence came in the covert recordings. This was damning.
It's just that it's out of defense. He doesn't know what it is. He's fucking strange.
It was such compelling testimony to hear people in their own words talking about how they had tried to cover up evidence, what they should be telling the police, just the kind of stuff that blows your mind, really.
That girl is, well, I mean, that girl has ruined my life.
Yeah,
she has ruined my life.
She did ruin your life.
I questioned his mum in court. I think what came through that evidence is exactly what our theory was, that both Elliot Turner's mum and dad were going to do everything they could to support their son, but also to pervert the course of justice.
She was very good at presenting her son as the victim in all this. That she was just a mother who was trying to help her son and they shouldn't be there. And I don't think it fooled anyone.
So I played the 999 call to Elliot Turner's mum when she gave her evidence in court.
Got anything round her neck?
Anything around her neck? Oh, that necklace. Necklace of beauty. No, she's got a necklace very tight.
Very tight round her neck?
Yes.
How tight?
Very, very tight.
It really exposed her as somebody who knew what her son had done, but simply was prepared to go through a charade of a 999 call, letting the authorities think that this was an unexplained death when she knew plainly it wasn't.
This is your opportunity to sort of speak to a lot of people who can't understand why you did what you did. Do you have anything at all to say?
They didn't even have the decency to call an ambulance when they found out that she was dead. Their first concern was to try and concoct a story to get Turner off. At least give Emily the dignity of being taken away from the home and not lying in the bed of the man who murdered her.
Whenever a jury goes out to deliberate in a trial, it's always very tense.
It was an agonizing few days sitting in the waiting room.
We made every argument that we should make, put forward every piece of evidence that there was, but you never know. Ultimately, you put your arguments before the jury and they decide.
We went in together and we were all sitting in the gallery. We're going to hear the biggest decision of our lives.
If we thought the tension was high at the beginning of the trial, it was nothing on how that courtroom felt just before the verdict was to be delivered. Everybody was just there hanging on what the jury was about to say.
The jury all comes back. They all sit down and it's like, just get on with it. Just put us out of our misery. I can't remember what they said, but it was, do you find Elliot Turner guilty or not guilty? And they said guilty.
The jury found Elliot Turner guilty of murder. They found his parents guilty of perverting the course of justice. He was exposed for what he is. He was a liar.
I just remember this howl when the verdict went down. And I knew straight away it had to be Emily's mum up in the public gallery. That was a mother finally hearing what she'd come to hear.
I just remember thinking, thank God, it's done, it's over. This is it. We can start to heal now and grieve properly and actually even start that grieving process.
Lost a beautiful daughter, Emily, who was on the cusp of adulthood when Turner murdered her. We all still love her very much.
I was just so relieved that the kind of truth had come out, that he had murdered Emily and he was going to pay the price for it.
I felt in some way relieved that Emily had received justice, but I also felt that Elliot is not going to be able to ruin someone else's life.
I went back to New Zealand about a week later. You just try and get through every day, and you have this burden of grief, which is crippling at times.
You learn to live with your grief, but your grief is still there every single day. I think about Emily every single day.
You find things in your life to give you hope and a reason to keep going.
My dad had 2 more kids, and my stepmom basically gave birth to me and my sister in boy form. The older younger brother is like my twin, and then my younger brother is Emily's twin, and it's just so bizarre. The fact that we got that in the family is just, amazing.
Something that really struck me about how manipulative and controlling Elliot Turner was.
He just wanted to control her in the relationship that was controlling, what she wore, who she saw, who she spoke to. Killing someone is the ultimate way that you can control them, you end their life.
I definitely think Emily thought that she could handle it. She thought she could handle everything. But at the same time, I don't think she really understood the danger she was in.
There is now a statutory offence of coercive and controlling behaviour. That's really important to reflect that behaviour specifically in a crime.
Don't assume that domestic abuse looks like one thing, because it can happen to so many people.
If somebody is excessively or obsessively asking you what you did last night, who you were with, where are you going, call me, text me, being very aggressive to you one minute, very kind of loving and affectionate to the other, which is what Turner was like.
When they start to isolate you from other people in your world, and it can be really subtle, it's educating ourselves on what these red flags are, and not only what they are, but what to do when you're faced with them.
And it's something that men have got to address and deal with. If you see your mate behaving like this, just say something. You are the most influential person in your friend's life.
We know that It's incredibly difficult for anybody to report this. We understand that, but the message always is that there is support and to encourage the reporting of domestic violence and to know that you have the support of the authorities and ultimately you have the support of a prosecution.
There comes a point where you have to move past what happened. Emily was murdered, and the last time I saw her was in a morgue, and we had a trial, and all that is really unpleasant. That's not the place where I live with Emily.
Daddy! Emily, boo.
I live in the happy memories of her.
If you or someone you know has been affected by any of the issues raised in tonight's programme, please go to channel5.com/helplines for information and support. More true crime coming up. Sleeping with My Murderer is new next.